So you think you can tell heaven from hell, blue skies from pain. Can you tell a green field?
Welcome everyone to the first Belmarsh Tribunal. Today, imperialism is on trial. The Progressive International has founded this tribunal inspired by the famous Russell Sartre Tribunal, which was founded in 1966 to put on trial the most powerful country in the world, namely the United States, and to shed light on the atrocities and war crimes that happened in Vietnam. During that time, the Russell Sartre Tribunal was composed of a jury which consisted of plenty intellectuals, philosophers, and activists from all around the world. Beside Bertrand Russell and Jean-Paul Sartre, of course, there was Isaac Deutscher, Günther Anders, Simone de Beauvoir, and many others. The witnesses even came from Vietnam. The first Russell Tribunal was supposed to be held in London or Paris, but because of the interference of CIA, it was declined, so they had to hold it in Stockholm and in Denmark. And even witnesses from Vietnam came and showed their wounds burned by napalm. Today, we are inaugurating something what we call the Belmarsh Tribunal. And we are inspired by the Russell Sartre Tribunal, although there are some differences between these two tribunals. And there is, of course, a difference of half of a century between these tribunals, although many atrocities and war crimes happened in the meantime as well. One of the commonalities between these two tribunals is something what Jean-Paul Sartre told at his inaugural statement at the Russell Tribunal, which was held in Stockholm. He said, we are independent because we are weak, but our position is strong because we don't seek to send a few individuals to prison, but to reawaken the public opinion at this ominous moment of our history. Today, we are again in an ominous moment of our history. There is a pandemic ravaging outside of our flats, outside of our homes, if we have the luck to have homes. Climate crisis is also getting worse. The permanent threat of a nuclear war is also here, and the whole world is already going. It is just enough to look at the United States today into civil wars. Why did we call this tribunal the Belmarsh Tribunal? Well, the answer is simple. We called it the Belmarsh Tribunal after the prison where one of the most courageous publishers and journalists of the 21st century is being held, namely Belmarsh in UK. Julian Assange is put on trial for revealing war crimes, while the real criminals are drinking champagne and celebrating the apocalypse. One difference between these two tribunals, between the Russell Tribunal and the just inaugurated Belmarsh Tribunal, is that we are not asking for witnesses. We are not calling witnesses who were victims of US or any other imperialism. Why? Again, the answer is very simple. Because WikiLeaks already revealed the crimes which were going on all across the world. It revealed the assassination of innocent civilians in Iraq and Afghanistan. It revealed the torture in Guantanamo. It revealed a massive surveillance program and system by the CIA. And these are the real and only reasons why Julian Assange is now at Belmarsh prison and why he is asked to come, not asked, but forced to come to the United States, where he would spend 175 years in prison together with terrorists and other criminals in complete solitary confinement. And to slowly prepare the floor for our jury members who are joining us today from all across the world, let me quote what Che Guevara said during the Vietnam War. He said, we need several Vietnams. And what did the US government say? The US government said, then we will crush Vietnam in the same way that we crashed you. Today, we have to say we need several Assanges. And if the US government says we will crush you in the same way that we crashed Chelsea Manning, Snowden, Julian Assange, and many others, we will say we will not stop. We will continue with the Belmarsh Tribunal, we will continue with the social support, and we will continue to reawaken public opinion in the absence of an international authority which can put the main imperial states, and not just United States, on trial. Jean-Paul Sartre, at his inaugural statement during the Russell Tribunal, said the following thing: when a peasant falls into the rice field, moved down by a machine gun, every one of us is hit. The Vietnamese fight for all men, and the American forces fight against all. I could paraphrase, and I think we should, the members of the jury of the Belmarsh Tribunal, paraphrase this quote by Sartre and say, when an Assange, when Edward Snowden, when Chelsea Manning is put into prison or into a cage and cannot return to their countries or to their families or to their friends, every one of us is hit. Julian Assange fights for all men, while the US government fights against everyone. It is my great honor that today I can present the members of the jury of the first Belmarsh Tribunal who come all over the world. So I have to say good morning, good evening, good day, and also hello to everyone who will watch us in the future. One of the problems of the Russell Tribunal was that there was no mainstream media covering. There was no internet at that era, so it was kind of suppressed. But what you had later in the decades to come was a very strong anti-war movement, not just in the United States, but all across Europe. So let's not underestimate the power of words. Let's not underestimate the power of this today's event. I'm really happy that today I can say hello to our friends and comrades from Vancouver, Los Angeles, Brussels, Athens, Berlin, many other cities, including the Adriatic Sea. The first member of the jury who will talk about the US crimes and also defend Julian Assange is one of the founders of Pink Floyd, not just a musician, but an activist and an anti-imperialist. I'm really happy that I can invite Roger Waters to join the Belmarsh Tribunal. Hello, Roger, nice to see you.
Hey, good to see you. How's my hair?
I think it's just fine for an online tribunal.
It's a bit lockdown.
Yeah,
anyway,
a bit.
Let's not waste time.
How are you, Roger? You, if I get it right, you are under lockdown in New York, right?
Yeah.
It's morning in New York.
Yeah, it's 9:10.
Yeah, you have been an outspoken critic of imperialism for decades. You have been a supporter of Julian Assange. Could you, for the very start of the beginning of this tribunal, speak about this experience of defending Assange and criticizing imperialism? And why do you think this case sets a precedent, not just for journalism, but for democracy to come?
No, I can't, because I wrote something last night. I stayed up late and I wrote this, so I'm going to read it.
Okay, even better, the original members of the Russell Tribunal were also reading, so thanks a lot for preparing. Yeah. Please.
So good morning, everybody. A lot of you I know, so it's really nice to be with you again. Here we go. I wrote this late last night, so I'm going to read it as fast as I can, because blah. I should, by rights, be terrified, called upon as I am, to stand here before this select company of my brothers and sisters, my comrades in arms, to speak on this platform dedicated as it is to the memory of one of our all-time heroes, the great mathematician and philosopher Bertrand Russell, in support of another of our heroes, our brother and comrade, the great journalist and publisher Julian Assange. I should be dry-mouthed and tongue-tied. I should be terrified, but I am not. I've never been to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, but I've seen them on TV. Someone stands up and says, my name is X and I am an alcoholic. In that moment, they are freed from their terror. Well, my name is Roger Waters and I care about people. There, I said it. And in this moment, I am free of shame and fear. In this moment, I am no longer alone. I'm part of a global brotherhood that cares about people, a global brotherhood that reaches from the Ganges to the Jordan, from the Jordan to the sea, from the Amazon to the Wet'suwet'en, from all of you to me. In this moment, I'm free of shame and fear, but not of anger. I've been following the extradition proceedings in the court in London with equal measures of disbelief and disgust. And some lyrics I wrote 40 years ago for a theatrical piece called The Wall come to mind, if I may. The evidence before the court is incontrovertible. There's no need for the jury to retire. The prisoner who now stands before you was caught red-handed, showing feelings of an almost human nature. This will not do. Now those lyrics fit the kangaroo court in London and would sound perfect coming out of the mouth of Judge Barrister. It has become abundantly clear that Judge Barrister doesn't give a fig for human feelings or for the law. The prisoner in the dock, Julian Assange, in contrast, cares deeply for the feelings of his fellow human beings and for human rights law. That is why he is in the dock on trumped up charges of espionage. Excuse the pun. Let us be clear, Julian Assange should never have been arrested in the first place. He has committed no crime, unless it is a crime to expose war crimes. Well, is it? Is it a crime to expose war crimes? No, it isn't. Exposing war crimes is the absolute duty of any journalist worth his salt. Earlier this year, in February, before the COVID lockdown, I was in London to join a march from the Australian Embassy to Parliament Square to support Julian. There I delivered a few words. I'd like to share a few of them with you now. I went, we are here today for blah, 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 blah. First name and last, of course, is Julian Assange, a journalist, a courageous shiner of light into the dark places which the powers that be would dearly like to have us turn away. Julian Assange, a name to be carved with pride into any monument to human progress. Blah, 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 blah. Second name, sent to me by my friend Vijay Prashad, is Amir Aziz. Amir is a young poet and activist in Delhi, involved in the fight against Modi and his racist citizenship law. I then read a poem of Amir's, which we can refer to, but we won't right now because I'm going to try and scrabble on, taking up too much time. This outpouring of the human spirit from India is taking place in a time of revolt, when the fetters of propriety are set aside. Across the Atlantic in Argentina, thousands of women are taking to the streets to demand the legalization of abortion from President Fernandez. It's not just Argentina. This last year, we've seen major protests erupt across the whole world against neoliberal, anti-people regimes. In Chile, Lebanon, Colombia, Ecuador, Haiti, France, and now, of course, also our brothers and sisters in Bolivia, fighting the new US-imposed military dictatorship there. My point is, the fight for freedom for Julian Assange is a fight for freedom for all our brothers and sisters everywhere, irrespective of their color, religion, or nationality. Our love recognizes no walls or boundaries. When we see individual violations of human rights, our hearts break. It is called empathy, and it is our most precious gift. My father and my mother handed down this gift to me. My father died in 1944 in Italy fighting the Nazis. A few years ago, I wrote a poem about my father and that gift. It is called One River. I'm going to read it. When the wind scythes through the crop and good men fall, and children soft in mother's arms cringe unbelieving from the desperado's casual blade, distant now, Ivan warm and strong in uniform tobacco haze speaks out. My son, he says, stay not the passion of your loss, but rather keen and hone its edge, that you may never turn away, numb, brute, from bets too difficult to hedge. What price the child? Which, yours or mine? This one at home, the baby bird in whistling bowls of pasta worms, or that one on TV, dead and grainy in some Balkan ditch. To fail to feel that other father's loss denies connections forged in filial blood and handed banner bright from man to boy in pride of place, loins strong, bereft of pettiness and rancor. So cup your tears, my father says. Cup that salt badge of strife. It flows from but one river, and it was on that, my son, I bet my life. I then talk about my mother. No, fuck it, I'm going to read all this. My mother cared about people too. As a young supply school teacher in the north of England, before the war, she saw the children of mill workers walking barefoot to school through the snow in the depths of winter. In that moment, my mother's light went on and it stayed burning bright for the rest of her life. One day, when I was 13 or 14, she said to me, as you go through life, Roger, you will encounter difficult times and difficult questions that you will need to ponder. It won't always be easy, so here's my advice for those times. Seek the truth, look at the question from all sides, by all means listen to other opinions, try to remain objective. When you've come to the end of your deliberations, your hard work is over. Now comes the easy bit. Just do the right thing. What a gift. Okay, this brings me to my closing remarks. I'm an Englishman, and the proceedings to extradite Julian Assange are in England. So I can't close without addressing a word to the English Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. Here goes. Boris, the one word is pitiful. We used to at least pretend that we, the British, were interested in fair play, in the law, in justice, in Magna Carta, in habeas corpus. Of course, we never really did, but we used to pretend. So there was a time when, right or wrong, the spirit of the British was encapsulated in the image of a formidably defiant canine, the British bulldog. Sadly, as exemplified by you, Boris, the current Prime Minister of England, the days of the British bulldog are long gone. The top breed in the English kennel these days is a relatively new breed, the American poodle. It is sadly not very bright, but equally sadly very biddable. And saddest of all, very, very loyal to its masters in Washington. For once in your life, Boris, heed my old mum. Do the right thing. Free Julian Assange. Right, I've finished.
Thanks a lot, Roger, for this very inspiring speech, reminding us of the importance of brotherhood, and I would add sisterhood, reminding us of the importance of our parents, of our elders, of those who have fought Nazism in the past. And thank you for speaking so courageously for Julian. I will now invite the next speaker, and Roger, if you can still stay for a few moments and join in a dialogue after the speakers, that would be wonderful. So I'm inviting my good friend and comrade Yanis Varoufakis, the former finance minister of Greece, co-founder of DiEM25, and a long-standing friend of Julian Assange. Yanis, thanks so much for joining the Belmarsh Tribunal today. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Srečko. Yes, Roger, this is the time to call upon the Borises of the world and to show them up for their inconsistencies and for turning from bulldogs into lackeys, into poodles. This is the time, however, for all of us to change tack. We spent, I think, far too long defending an innocent man for leaking the dirty secrets of power. We protested for too long against the right to destroy Julian's body, to silence his voice. We have pleaded for far too long so that they stop torturing a man who dared reveal to us the crimes against humanity perpetrated by our governments in our name behind our backs. I also believe we've spent far too long warning the good people out there who don't give a damn about Julian, that first they came for Julian, then they're going to come for others that reveal their dirty secrets. Finally, they will come for those apathetic people who today don't give a damn about Julian, and then those apathetic citizens of the world will have no one to defend them. We have used too much energy trying to impress journalists who fail so spectacularly to support Julian, that in so failing, they are jeopardizing their own profession. They are neutering themselves. They are allowing themselves to be added to some hit list. They are consenting to their own emasculation. So enough of wasting all this energy. If we are truly in the business of allowing unalloyed truth to be revealed, to have the final word, we must make the transition from defending Julian, from warning against the dire consequences of his extradition for him, for us, for the world, from explaining to the apathetic that their apathy equals their powerlessness, from going on from all this defensive posture to turning the tables on the criminals that are behind his persecution. We must turn the current court case into a trial of those who ordered young soldiers to kill civilians, to maim and to murder journalists, to shroud whole communities into pain and tears. We must turn Julian's prosecutors into defendants and allow the grandest of juries out there, the demos, to pass fair judgment upon them. This is not hard to do, as Sergio said before. Thanks to WikiLeaks, the evidence is at our fingertips. It is available to everyone. Is this not why the guilty are demanding Julian's extradition? Is this not why the murderers are plotting to entomb Julian in a Supermax coffin for 175 years? I hope, Roger, you won't mind it if I quote from your poem, The Trial, Part of the War, something that comes below what you said. You said, the evidence before the court is incontrovertible. There is no need for the jury, this jury, the Belmarsh jury, to retire. In all our years of judging, we've never heard before of someone so deserving of the full penalty of the law. That someone are those who are persecuting Julian today. So, friends, comrades, we can do it. If Dimitrov, in his trial, which, let me remind you, took place in Nazi Germany itself, who turned the tables against Goering and Goebbels, surely we can turn the current court case into a trial of the military-industrial national security complex. Noting that even the Nazi courts gave Dimitrov greater opportunity to defend himself, to speak in his own defense, than Julian is getting inside the glass box. We can nevertheless use what is left of liberal democracy's instruments to take the fight to his accusers with a glorious, a magnificent, a righteous, a collective, we accuse you. For this reason, I salute this Belmarsh Tribunal. I salute today's event. I salute all of you who are part of it, either as speakers or as active observers and watchers. Above all, I salute Julian for having sacrificed so much so that we can accuse those who truly deserve to be accused, as is our want, as is our duty.
Thanks a lot, Yanis, for your very powerful speech and for making one of the first important points of this tribunal today, and that is the point that our obligation and duty, not only toward Julian, but everyone and the demos, is to turn the trial against him into a trial against imperialism and the military-industrial complex. I will now invite the next speaker, Alicia Castro, also a council member of the Progressive International, who was a former ambassador of Argentina, precisely in London during the times when Julian was still held at the Ecuadorian embassy. Please, Alicia, your words at the Belmarsh Tribunal.
Thank you very much. Buenos días. Muchas gracias. I'm in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, in the south of the south, but feeling very, very close to you today in our common struggle. If wars can be started by lies, peace can be started by truth. I'm quoting our dearest Julian. I met Julian, as Shreko recalled, when I was ambassador of Argentina in the United Kingdom in 2012. And upon his arrival, we started a conversation, our understanding. We met many, many times in the embassy of Ecuador when Correa granted his asylum. And we started a friendship and an understanding that I treasure. I learned a lot from Julian. We now, comrades, are in the middle of a fragmented war, as Pope Francis states, a third world war. And wars have become more and more sophisticated. We are suffering wars by other means, like in South America, in Bolivia, in Brazil, such as soft coup produced by the conjunction of the manipulation of justice, known as lawfare, and the mass media. And the trial in Old Bailey these last 4 weeks reveal us that this trial is a farce, a parody to give the appearance of legality to the criminalization of a man who tore the veil on war crimes, corruption, massive surveillance, and who democratized truth among men and women, the secrets that before belonged only to the elite of the military-industrial complex. Masses of people around the world deserve to know what happened in Afghanistan, what happened in Iraq, why Libya, that was once the most prosperous country in Africa, is now in ruins. How did the United States of America and how intervene in every single coup in Latin America and is still doing? Why is the Mediterranean a cemetery now? And that is why we reunite in this People's Tribunal, an international war crimes tribunal with the same aims of the Russell Charter of 1966. And we even have one of its previous members, an old friend of ours, Tariq Ali. The Tribunal of 1966 stated then, and I will read, "We constitute ourselves a tribunal which, even if it has no power to impose sanctions, will have to answer, among others, the following questions. 1. Has the United States government and its allies committed acts of aggression according to international law? 2. Has the American army made use of or experimented with new weapons or weapons forbidden by the laws of war? Has there been bombardment of targets of a purely civilian character, for example, hospitals, schools, dams, etc.? And on what scale has this occurred? Have prisoners been subjected to inhuman treatment forbidden by the laws of war, and in particular to torture and mutilation? We know the answers, comrades, and we know the answers thanks to Julian Assange. The hypocrisy of the system that punishes a publisher of war crimes, but not the war criminals, not one of them, not one of the war criminals. And same in the Russell Tribunal, in this Belmarsh Tribunal. They can ask us who we are. We are not prosecutors. We don't have the strength or the power to impose sanctions. And as Jean-Paul Sartre answered then, we could answer, qui je sois, mais n'importe qui, who am I? It doesn't matter at all. Every citizen should be capable of judging what matters, and that is what makes us human. As Luther said, every man is a prophet, every woman is a prophet. The government of the United States is not looking for justice. What United States is claiming is universal jurisdiction, a global power, imperialism, and the right to prosecute any journalist anywhere in the world who publishes the truth about the United States. This is not justice. This is cruelty. This is not justice. This is revenge, and we stand against it.
Thanks a lot, Alicia, for a very powerful speech, and thank you for reminding us and putting in the context of the original Russell Sartre Tribunal. And I will also make a thought experiment. If we would ask the same questions today, these 5 questions, I think the answer would again be yes. From Yemen to the drone attacks to all the atrocities which the US government is doing today. So there is a lot of work to do at the Belmarsh Tribunal. Not to lose any time, I'm inviting back Yanis and Roger for a short discussion, and then after that we will go to a discussion and to the testimonies and speeches by some people who were already mentioned, Rafael Correa, Tariq Ali, and we will also be joined by the lawyer of Julian Assange, Jennifer Robinson. But before they come, I would love to give the floor back to Roger to see if you have a comment on the other speeches, or you could elaborate further the importance of this gathering today.
You see, I just nipped out into the kitchen to put some water on to boil an egg for my breakfast. So
I think that's wonderful.
I watched the beginning of Alicia's speech with great interest, and I'm really glad to hear that both Yanis and Alicia are getting to the meat of the thing, which is that we should be prosecuting Boris Johnson and Donald Trump and Modi and blah, 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 Bolsonaro, and all the other war criminals, rather than focusing on all of this energy on defending our friend Julian. And it's iniquitous that we can't, but maybe more meetings and gatherings and juries like this one in memory of the Russell Tribunals on Palestine and before on Vietnam will help to achieve that end. Blah.
Yeah, I think this is actually, if I can give a comment on your eggs and your breakfast, although we cannot meet physically, I think the beauty of this tribunal is that we can have eggs and breakfast in the same way Sartre was smoking the cigar constantly during the tribunal. So we can also have some fun, because I think fun, empathy, as you mentioned, excitement is something what the left and the progressives desperately miss. Yanis, you have heard also Alicia's speech. Maybe you want to give a comment on that, and on Roger, please.
Well, I'm very glad that Alicia got stuck into the comparisons between the Russell Tribunal and the Belmarsh Tribunal. Thank you, Alicia, for delving more deeply into this. A comment on something that Roger just said. The trial that we are conducting must turn not just against the big beasts like the Trumps and the Boris Johnsons and the Bolsonaros, but remember what Hannah Arendt said about the banality of evil, about all the apparatchiks who are the cogs in the machine. I would propose that we begin with a judge, with a presiding judge, who continues to preside over this trial, despite the obvious, mind-boggling conflict of interest. Her husband has been exposed by WikiLeaks. This is the mother of all conflicts of interest. There is no judge in the world that would not recuse herself or himself if there was such a conflict of interest. And yet she's refusing to do this. No one is calling upon her to do it amongst the establishment, not even the Guardian newspaper. You see, in the final analysis, Roger and Alicia and Sechko, Boris Johnson is going to get his comeuppance. He's a politician. At some point, he'll be toppled by the people, one way or the other. But what about this judge? What about the little bureaucrats that luxuriate in the moment of cruelty that the system affords them? We must do forensic work. We must be a genuine tribunal. We must find out exactly what the husband of that judge did. What kind of deals was his company involved in that WikiLeaks exposed? We must present evidence, and we must do some work for that. It's not enough simply to make the grand statements about the Nationalist International and the beasts that are figureheads, effectively. Because let's face it, even if Biden takes over from Trump, the case against Julian will continue. This is much deeper than any figurehead insinuates.
Yeah, Roger, I can see your hand up. You want? Yep. You're muted, Roger. You have to unmute down.
No,
Yes.
it's okay. Now I can hear you.
I don't know how
That's
to
fine. I
do
can
that.
hear you now.
We can hear you.
Yeah.
You can hear me now. Somebody else had to unmute it. Yeah, he's talking about Arbuthnot, right? Lord Arbuthnot. Is that the husband that you're talking about? I read something about it. What's interesting about what Yanis said is that, and about the apparatchiks and the cult in the machine, it brings us back to the whole question that is central to all of these conversations, which is propaganda, which is the obstacle to human understanding. Julian was trying to break down, that WikiLeaks was absolutely set up for, was to break through that wall of you're only allowed to hear this. And from the moment that we're born, the moment we go to kindergarten, all the way through school, all the way through everything, all the newspapers, all the TV stations, all over well, not all of them completely, thank goodness there are a few outlets where you can hear some truth, but are conditioning us to believe that this is normal and it's okay when we know it's not. But that the biggest fight is in media, is in television, and our ability or lack of ability to communicate one with another, but to communicate with the apparatchiks, and even at the end of the day with the Proud Boys. With all those concentration camp guards just waiting to put their jackboots on and get their foot on the neck of humanity. How do we get through? I know I'm reaching into the distant future, maybe, because this is going to be a very, very long struggle. I'm sorry, I was straying off the point a bit.
No, I think Roger just mentioned something very important, which, incidentally or not, one of the original members of the Russell Sartre Tribunal, the German-Austrian philosopher Günther Anders, mentioned writing about the Russell Tribunal. He said that before the crimes, the atrocities of the United States government, there was something what he calls, there was a pre-crime. A crime already happened. And the crime was the dressing and the manipulation of the public opinion in the way to prepare them to accept such an unjust war. So I can see commonalities between our two tribunals, and I will give the closing remarks to Alicia Castro so that we can continue with the next session. I'm of course inviting everyone here, Roger, Yanis. I know Yanis has to rush to the parliament, to the continent of Greece, but if you can stay a bit longer, that would be great. We have many surprises coming. Some guests are joining who were not announced. But let me not spoil it. Please, Alicia, if you can give your closing remarks and then stay if you want to stay later, it would be fantastic.
Well, very briefly, I was on the track of what Yanis said, that we have to be a genuine tribunal. I think that's very, very powerful idea and a task that, of course, we are ready to fulfill. So we have to see who and how did people manage to criminalize a man when we are all suffering about the confusion and the mess of fake news, and the truth is almost lost. To see this man that represents truth, that embodies truth, to see him in that situation, encaged like an animal in that prison, and facing this extradition to a country that he didn't harm, he didn't belong to. So I think this is not only the trial of our time, but I think that shows us the crisis of our civilization. I'm ready to to agree with our comrade Chomsky that said that we are in the verge of destruction, of apocalypse. So what we've seen in Old Bailey. It's not only the destruction of a man, but we are seeing the abolition of justice, the total abolition of justice. If you see one after the other, the witnesses that were quoting all the benefits that we got from Julian, I mean, through the knowledge we got, for instance, in Latin America, the diplomatic cables, it's very important to see how the United States intervene in our coups and in our political decisions and our lives. So it was pure benefit. And then all the war criminals, and all the horrors that were told are unpunished. So what we are seeing, it's really abolition of justice and the attempt to end up with all truth that we can find in this world. So yes, Reco, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 100 Vietnams, as Che Guevara said. And following Yanis when he said we should look for everybody that put this farce together, I don't want to avoid the responsibility of the president of Ecuador, Lenin Moreno, because if some people could be tempted to compare the martyrdom of Julian to the martyrdom of Christ, we could say that Lenin Moreno is Judas. He's a Judas, and I think it's the right thing to do, to point out people that had been putting together this cruelty and this revenge.
Thanks a lot, Alicia. To close this session, I think you made really important points from the necessity for this court to continue and to investigate the crimes, even the judge, as you said, Lenin Moreno. But I would just add what Yanis said, that we should also focus on the little cogs, on the apparatchiks in the system. But I would frame it in a positive way, because if there wasn't the small cogs like Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden, among thousands of them, of course, who didn't do the same thing, but there were some people who said, this is not just, this is right, we have to do it, we have to reveal it. So this tribunal is also speaking to those people. Before we continue with the next session, and I invite you all, the three of you, to stay here or come back if you can, we will show a video which kind of summarizes the main important leaks by WikiLeaks, which will actually show why Julian Assange is in prison at this moment.
Good to see you in this exercise in transparency. Good to see you in this exercise in transparency and democracy.
A decade ago, we knew a lot less about the world's powerful leaders and institutions. We knew only what they wanted us to know.
Don't worry, be happy. Don't worry, be happy.
Don't worry, be happy.
Don't worry, be happy.
Don't worry, be happy.
Don't worry, be happy. Don't worry, be happy.
Don't worry, be happy.
We didn't know how casually they broke the law or stitched up trade deals, how routinely they conducted mass surveillance or kidnapped, indefinitely detained, tortured, or even murdered people. But then,
the whistleblowing website WikiLeaks.
WikiLeaks is getting ready for a bombshell.
WikiLeaks, Julian Assange.
The guy ought to be, and I'm not for the death penalty, so if I'm not for the death penalty, the only one to do it, illegally shoot the son of a
WikiLeaks.
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 WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks.
WikiLeaks.
I think the man is a high-tech terrorist.
Julian Assange founded WikiLeaks, a media organization unlike any other. In 1 decade, WikiLeaks has published more secret documents than all the rest of the world's media combined. WikiLeaks has published more than 10 million documents, more than 10 billion words. If you print them out, they would reach the center of the earth and then come out the other side. To celebrate WikiLeaks' birthday, here are the top 10 greatest hits, 10 publications that helped us all better understand the world we live in. In 2007, WikiLeaks showed us inside Guantanamo Bay by publishing the manuals and standard operating procedures used to hide prisoners from the Red Cross, as well as PR guides used to eliminate certain words like suicide or to rename a hunger strike as voluntary fasting. 500,000 documents make up the Iraq and Afghanistan war logs, the most detailed description of war to have ever been published. Each attack and death is listed, including 15,000 kills that had been kept secret from the public. When European oil company Trafigura dumped illegal toxic chemicals in the Ivory Coast, it convinced a British court to gag the BBC and The Guardian. WikiLeaks published the gag documents breaking the censorship ban. In 2010, WikiLeaks revealed how a US Apache helicopter killed 18 people, including 2 journalists and people in a van driving children to school. What shocked the world was the video game commentary of soldiers eager to kill.
Look at that, right through the windshield. Oh yeah, look at those dead bastards. Nice.
The children from the van were severely injured in the attack. Their father and the other adults in the van were killed.
The United States strongly condemns the illegal disclosure of classified information.
Later that year, WikiLeaks released over 250,000 secret US diplomatic cables about every country in the world. Cablegate exposed wrongdoing on every continent. WikiLeaks exposed the largest international agreements that the world has ever seen, the 3 big T's, which are being negotiated in secret. The 3 big T's are big businesses' new strategy to bypass the World Trade Organization and ensure that they get to set the international rules of what other countries can and cannot do.
Today, WikiLeaks begins its release of emails documenting the private lives and private lies of private spies.
WikiLeaks revealed the inner workings of private intelligence company Stratfor that provides advice to US government agencies, arms companies, and Dow Chemical, who hired Stratfor to spy on the victims of the largest chemical disaster in history caused by their plant in Bhopal, India. With the 2.3 million emails published in the Syria files, including the emails of its head of state Bashar al-Assad, WikiLeaks revealed the true nature of the Syrian elite. The Syria files also shed light on how Western companies profited from Syria by breaching sanctions. WikiLeaks revealed the US National Security Agency's spying on world leaders, including Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany and the UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon, the last 3 French presidents, and President Berlusconi of Italy. Finally, coming in at number 10 are the emails of the US Democratic National Committee, which showed how the DNC undemocratically and illicitly stacked the deck against Bernie Sanders.
Welcome back to the Belmarsh Tribunal. We will now continue with our second session, and I'm honored to present the following members of the Belmarsh Tribunal jury. The first among them is the former president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa. Hello, Rafael, nice to see you. Or not see you yet, but it will work. We don't see a video yet, but it will come, I'm sure. Great.
Okay, it's fine.
Let me present the other speakers as well, and then I will give you the floor. The next one with us, and I'm really grateful that she found the time during this 1 month, very exhausting trial for everyone, for the family, for the lawyers, and for Julian Assange, of course. This is Jennifer Robinson, the lawyer of Julian Assange from London. Nice to see you, Jennifer, again.
Hi, good to see you. Thanks for hosting us.
Yeah, and the next one is one of the original former members of the Russell Tribunal who went to Vietnam to investigate the crimes which he presented then at the Russell Tribunal. This is my good old friend, not old in the sense of being old, but old in the sense of good old comrade, Tariq Ali. Hi, Tariq, nice to see you. And we have a very pleasant surprise, which was not planned, but obviously our tribunal is growing as we speak. We have Jeremy Corbyn with us today as well. Hello, Jeremy, nice to see you. And thanks for making the time to join us at this important event.
And we're not yet up to 6 people, Jeremy, so you're all right.
So I would love to start with Rafael. Mr. Correa was already mentioned as the president whom we can thank the asylum at the Ecuadorian embassy in London. But when Lenin Moreno came to power, things, as we could have seen and as we can still see, went pretty bad. So, Rafael, maybe you can give us your perspective, and if you prepared the speech, tell us what you prepared, or tell us about those times, how you decided, and why did you decide to give the political asylum to Julian Assange?
Of course, my pleasure. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Un saludo a toda la audiencia hispanohablante, especialmente a Latinoamérica. As you may know, in 2012, when I was president of the Republic of Ecuador, we granted asylum to Julian Assange. He had entered our embassy in London. The official narrative said that Swedish justice required Julian to get his testimony about 3 legal processes related to sexual offenses. However, there was no warranty that Julian would not be extradited to the United States, where he would be judged according to the Espionage Act, an instrument from the beginning of the 20th century to pursue and to kill communists in the United States. Remember Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, for instance. Espionage Act includes the death penalty, something that is against the inter-American human rights system and the human rights in general. For these reasons, according to international law, as well as our constitution and sovereignty, we decided to grant asylum to Julian Assange because there was no warranty of a fair trial if he was extradited to the United States. Our intention never was to interfere with Swedish justice. In fact, the Swedish prosecutor was always able to interrogate Julian inside the embassy, in accordance with Swedish law and Ecuadorian law. She only did this several years later. Despite all the pressures, we were able to protect Julian in our embassy. Unfortunately, in 2017, I finished my presidential term. We won the presidential election, but the new president, my former Vice President Lenin Moreno, betrayed us, and from the beginning, he negotiated with Julian freedom. Now we know that after 1 week of taking office, he received Paul Manafort, the former campaign chief of Donald Trump, now in jail because of corruption. When Moreno and Manafort met, Moreno offered to hand over Julian to the American government in exchange of financial support. You can find all this information in the testimonies of the Manafort case in the United States. The rest is history. Julian began to be harassed and spied on our embassy. Finally, he was handed over to British police in April 2019. It's the first time in history that a government has allowed a foreign force, armed force, to enter its embassy. Moreno not only broke international law, human rights, he broke the Ecuadorian constitution, which in Article 41 expressly forbids handing over a refugee. But because Moreno has the protection of the United States and the Ecuadorian press, nothing happened. Some closing remarks about Assange's case. First, this is a retroceso civilizatorio, civilizing setback. It is the word backwards. The whistleblower is persecuted, and it is the criminals who are after him. Second, the double standard is impressive. If Julian had reported crimes from China or Russia, he would now be a hero in Washington and in Europe as well. Third, the role of the big press. They were the ones who published the information provided by Julian. No one chased them, and they shut up today. All my support to Julian and his family. Free Julian Assange. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rafael. I'm sorry that we are not at the public. I mean, it's a public tribunal, but it's online, but we cannot applaud. I'm sure there would be a big applause for your speech and also for your act for granting the asylum to Julian Assange. I will pass the floor now to Jennifer Robinson, a courageous lawyer who has been active on the Julian Assange case for years already. And maybe for those who are watching us and will watch us, I think the most useful to hear from you would be, how did it actually go during the trial? Can you also tell us about the final verdict, which I think is now going to happen in January next year? And what does it actually mean that Julian will spend his Christmas again in prison? And yeah, what are the next steps? How did it look like? Please.
Sure. Well, first, thank you for inviting me to speak with such an eminent group of people and a panel. First, can I take the opportunity to thank Rafael? I haven't had the opportunity to thank you personally for the decision that your government took, which was a principled one to grant Julian asylum inside the embassy. And in fact, a decision which was vindicated by the very case that he's now facing right now and the extradition proceedings which we've just been fighting. I think it's important to recognize that what Ecuador did was a remarkably strong and principled decision in the face of immense political pressure from global powers. A decision which was affirmed by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. It was the British government who was acting unlawfully and refusing to recognize the grant of asylum that was given by Ecuador. And indeed, the pressure that Ecuador came under. So I just wanted to, again, offer my thanks, personal thanks, and thanks on behalf of Julian for what the government of Ecuador did under your leadership. We've just finished 4 weeks of hearings in the Old Bailey, evidential hearings in the Old Bailey in our fight to resist extradition, to protect Julian from being sent to the United States. We've had around 40 witnesses and evidence that I think is remarkable. For those of you that have been following the case, it won't be a surprise, but for many, I think what we did in the past 4 weeks was to attempt to set the historical record straight on what WikiLeaks has done, what Julian Assange has done with the publications of WikiLeaks, and what this US indictment means. So what we've heard expert evidence on is something that I have been sounding like a broken record about for the past decade, which is about the impact that this criminal investigation and indictment of Julian Assange will have on free speech, not just in the United States, but globally. We heard from the Freedom of the Press Foundation in the United States about how this indictment, which criminalizes not just the publication of information, classified information, but the receipt and possession of classified information, and how this will put an end to all national security journalism and criminalize public interest journalistic practices. We heard evidence from political experts in the United States about the political interference in this case and the way in which this is a political prosecution and indeed persecution of Julian Assange by the Trump administration. We heard how the Obama administration had made an active decision not to indict Assange on the basis of the concern about how this case would be used against the rest of the media, the so-called New York Times problem. And yet now we have an administration that has taken a very different position and is using this case as a precedent-setting case which will be used to go after the rest of the media under an administration that calls the media the enemy of the people. We also heard evidence about the political interference by the Trump administration. I myself gave evidence in the case about a pardon deal which was offered by representatives purporting to represent President Trump. And the deal that was offered was that if Julian was willing to reveal the source of the DNC, the 2016 election publications, then he would be given a pardon. And that was important politically at that time because Trump was then the subject of the Mueller inquiry. And if Julian had revealed his source to show that it was not the Russian state, and indeed they hoped was an insider within the Democratic National, the DNC, then he would be let off. And this shows how the Trump administration was willing to treat this case as a political bargaining chip to benefit him politically. We also heard evidence of what for me as a human rights lawyer is so important about the way in which the WikiLeaks material has been used for human rights accountability efforts worldwide. We heard evidence from Clive Stafford Smith of Reprieve about the way in which WikiLeaks material was used in their efforts on behalf of Guantanamo detainees. It was used by their efforts in seeking to prosecute CIA officials in Pakistan for unlawful extrajudicial killings through drone strikes in Pakistan. We heard evidence about how the diplomatic cables, the WikiLeaks cables, were used, and indeed I cited them myself in the International Court of Justice in having British occupation of the Chagos Islands for US military purposes to be declared unlawful, and how important WikiLeaks cables were in that context. So I think it's really important to recognise the importance of WikiLeaks material in trying to hold the powerful to account for their abuses around the world. And it's striking to me that we have the person who is responsible for having revealed this information and enabling us to be able to undertake these advocacy and accountability efforts is in prison, while those responsible for the abuses continue to enjoy impunity. So we also heard important evidence, and I think this is amongst the most important, around WikiLeaks publication processes. We have heard over and over again for a decade that WikiLeaks somehow, and Julian has blood on his hands for having released this information. What we heard in the court in the past month is that the US government has no evidence of one individual being harmed as a result of WikiLeaks publications, which puts the lie to the accusations and the propaganda that has been put out about the supposed danger caused by WikiLeaks publications. We also heard extensive evidence about the redaction processes that WikiLeaks undertook with their media partners in order to protect against the harm that the United States claims took place, and the security procedures that were put in place. So this notion that the US government is putting about that Julian was reckless, that people were harmed, is simply false. The question then is, what is this going to mean in terms of the judgment? So we now have written submissions. There'll be no closing arguments, and the judgment will be handed down in February, the 4th of February, 2021. It remains to be seen whether the evidence we put will make a difference, and this judge will exercise her discretion to stop extradition. But we remain hopeful that even if we don't win at this level, that there will be appeals. It may end up in the UK Supreme Court, it may end up in the European Court of Human Rights, but we are committed to fighting this all of the way because of the implications that this has for Julian. I just wanted to say a couple of words too about the impact on him. For those of you who are watching remotely, you will have seen the difficulties that we had communicating with him because he's being held in a glass box at the back of the court. It's impossible. I have to get up and move out of my seat to be able to speak to him, and when he wants to tell me something about what's happening in the evidence, he can only whisper it to me through the glass defense box. And it's so loud that the prosecutor sitting next to us can hear exactly what he's saying to us. So we can't take confidential instructions from him during the course of the trial. It's still incredibly upsetting to me that I have to go and visit a Nobel Peace Prize nominated publisher and journalist in a high security prison in Britain, which is supposed to be the world's leading democracy. It is devastating to have to go into the underbelly of the Old Bailey to visit a publisher who does not deserve to be in prison. And he is going to be in prison for another Christmas while we wait for this judgment, and potentially longer while we appeal this case. I can't underestimate the personal impact that this has had on him. We heard evidence of the psychiatric impact, that he is suicidal, and that there is a very high risk that if he is extradited to the United States, he will in fact commit suicide. This is that serious and that stark. We have a Nobel Peace Prize nominated publisher in a high security prison facing 175 years in prison for publications which have been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. So I'm very happy to answer any further questions if anyone has them about the legal process or otherwise, but I hope that gives you a summary and an overview of where we've got to over the past month.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jennifer, for all the information. I think we could talk to you for hours just to find out more what actually happened at the court. And I think you mentioned something what should be a scandal in any democratic country, that the publisher and journalist is kept in a glass box. In the same way, Adolf Eichmann was also put in a glass box while we know what kind of crimes he did, unlike Julian. To pass the floor, please stay here. We will have a short round of discussion after all speakers spoke. Before I present the next speaker, I would just invite you all to go for a short minute back to history, to the original Russell Tribunal, to put it into this long-term global context.
The town was on fire. Incendiary bombs had been used. When we walked in, we had to walk, in most cases, over embers which had been lit. And we had to walk fast because our feet, while walking in these embers, were feeling hot. It had been impossible to visualize the agony of those under attack from a cozy office or from a cozy home in Western Europe. One was face to face with a situation which the Vietnamese told us has existed ever since the United States first started the bombing. They said, "Tell us, comrade, do you think what the United States is doing to us today? Do you think the use of napalm, of phosphorus, of fragmentation bombs, of all the other insidious devices they have invented, do you think that the United States would use them in Europe today?" And it was extremely difficult to reply in the affirmative.
Mitt under brinnande Vietnamkrig kommer tribunalen till stan.
Tariq Ali, please, the floor is yours. I know that you still give inspiring speeches as you did during the tribunal of Russell Sartre Tribunal. Unfortunately, there are not so many recordings of the tribunals. This is one of the rare ones. But we are really honored to have you at the Belmarsh Tribunal.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, the Bertrand Russell Jean-Paul Sartre Tribunal was instigated because people refused to believe that the US were committing war crimes. The tribunal was attacked by the entire media, rubbished on the BBC, and then 1 week after the tribunal ended, the My Lai massacre, one of the biggest massacres of Vietnamese civilians, was exposed by the New York Times. So what we did was very important. That was, of course, a huge war in which atrocities were being committed. What we are witnessing today is effectively a war against democracy, against democratic rights, against the right of people to know, and the insistence by the Western world, or most of it. The Germans have to be exempted from this and a few other countries, but mainly the United States and its British satellite, to impose one narrative on what is going on in the world today, and to prevent other news that challenges that narrative. That is what we've been seeing in the entire campaign of persecution against Julian Assange since 2010, when WikiLeaks exposed a whole number of crimes. And the media has played a major part in this denigration of Julian. The Economist, which boasts that it's the paper in favor of human rights, especially in Venezuela, actually wrote that Assange should be punished and extradited to the United States so that the, quote, the digital Jacobins of WikiLeaks are stopped from spreading this information, i.e. the truth. Do not speak, do not write the truth. That is what this has become a battle about. And have no doubt that the British state, both the so-called open state and the secret state, will do their best to ensure that Assange is extradited. I hope when it goes to the Supreme Court here, that changes might be possible, that they might stop this. I hope, but I am not confident at all, because what we have seen so far is a judge, a safe judge. In Britain, they have lists. Someone has a list. Who are the safe judges who will do our bidding? And that's the phrase they use. Is X, Y, Z a safe judge? Is A, B, and C totally reliable, partially reliable? There's a list. And for this, they found a safe judge. And the day I was in court, it was unbelievable. Unbelievable. Basically, she behaves as if she is part of the prosecution team. And she behaves like that because she is part of the prosecution team. She knows what her job is. And that is why she has allowed Julian to be brought into court and put behind a glass cage. It's an absolute scandal that this is happening. Just imagine if it were happening in a country which the West doesn't like, which is on the West's hate list, its sanction list. There would be outcries of anger. But many citizens in the West sleepwalk. They are aware of what's going on to a certain extent, but they feel they can't do anything. And that, I think, is a huge tragedy. And what is this a part of? This is now reaching a situation. I mean, I don't know when Britain was the world's leading democracy. Quite honestly, if you talk to people who the British colonized, no one will ever accept that particular assertion that Britain was a leading democracy, either at home or abroad. There have always been problems, and the judiciary has been part of the problem. The way the judiciary in Britain dealt with the Irish prisoners during the Troubles, locking up the wrong people, refusing to allow appeals, the way they have locked up large numbers of Muslims in Belmarsh, by the way, without them being brought to trial because they have no evidence. Habeas corpus has been suspended. This is the Britain we live in, and the United States actually is the same, especially now if Trump gets his way with the Supreme Court. So what we are seeing is a decaying of democratic institutions and a democracy that has been fought for by the people of these countries. Julian, alas, is the latest target. I know him reasonably well. I remember discussing him and the case just before he was given asylum at the embassy when I visited Rafael Correa's Ecuador, not the Ecuador of Moreno, who behaves and deals with the Americans like a narco lord, making money for himself and his corrupt colleagues. It's all about money for him. And so he sells out everything, including Julian Assange. It is a great pity when I think about it now that Julian actually didn't do what Snowden did and hop on a plane to Moscow. I wish him full support. I think we have to carry on. I think despite all the obstacles that we face, we have to try and convince as many people as we can that the way in which the trial is being conducted reveals a deep cancer at the heart of the English judicial system. And if this carries on, it'll be discredited further.
Thanks a lot, Tariq, and I'm so glad that we have you in this team at this Belmarsh Tribunal. You already spoke about the legal system in UK, and I'm really happy to welcome a surprise guest, the former leader of the UK Labour Party and a true internationalist, Jeremy Corbyn. Maybe, Jeremy, for the start, if you can also speak about the role of the UK government in what is obviously a scandal for international press and democracy.
Jeremy, turn your sound on. Turn your mic.
You have.
Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me onto the conference today for this tribunal. It's an honor to be invited to it. And I want to say thank you to all of the people that have already spoken about this, the way in which Jennifer has described the 10-year battle that she and others have fought to try to protect Julian Assange, and the way that Rafael Correa has paid such a very heavy price for the very bold decision he took as president of Ecuador. And it's been an absolute pleasure to meet him during one of my visits to Brussels last year. Some time ago, I asked the British Prime Minister what the situation was with Julian Assange during Prime Minister's Question Time. And he gave actually a very interesting and slightly surprising answer, because he confessed to me in Parliament, so therefore it doesn't get more public than that, that the extradition arrangements between Britain and the United States were lopsided, to put it mildly, in that the US can take somebody back to the United States who is accused of killing a British national in a incident outside an airbase in Britain, and applications to the USA for that person to be brought back to Britain to face trial and for the charge that's been brought against them by the police and the Crown Prosecution Service, and the US simply refuses on the basis it doesn't have to do so because the extradition arrangements are so lopsided. The Prime Minister accepted they're lopsided, and so I think one should just reflect on that for a moment, that the idea that Julian Assange should be extradited to the USA when there are no equivalent arrangements the other way around needs to be thought about very, very seriously. On behalf of my team in March of this year, I asked John McDonnell, then our Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer and very much a leading figure in our shadow cabinet at that time, to visit Julian Assange in prison. He did. He was shocked and appalled by the conditions, shocked and appalled by the condition that Julian had been forced into by his lengthy incarceration, and shocked by the conditions in Belmarsh. And having visited Belmarsh once in the past, it is not a nice place at all. It is a very, very brutal prison indeed. And so we then go through what Julian will face if extradited to the USA and what he's suffered so far. It's very clear from all that's been said in the court that if he goes to the United States, he will be put in a federal penitentiary under the most brutal conditions, 23 hours a day at least in solitary confinement, limited contact with anybody else, limited phone calls, limited reading material, and indeed it will be a perpetual punishment for him in the most awful conditions imaginable. Indeed, they've even identified the prison that he would be sent to. And if that happens, then what has been the role of the British government and the British judicial system in this? And that has to be looked at. Now, Julian already has suffered because he sought asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy, granted by President Correa. He was granted refugee status by the government of Ecuador, but unable to leave the embassy in Britain. And it then turns out that the people who were supposedly the security guards were in fact working for those that were opposed to Julian and making the situation much worse for him. What's also been strange has been the very limited reporting in the British media of the trial, because this is a massive trial by any stretch of the imagination. You have to go back a very long way to Sun Yat-sen's time to find a prominent foreign national taking refuge in an embassy in London in order to prevent themselves being deported somewhere else where their future would be, to put it mildly, uncertain. And then you have to look at what Julian is accused of. And I think the point that Rafael Correa made about the information he released, and the point that Jennifer made about the responsibility with which he released that information to prevent any individual being put in a place of danger as a result of WikiLeaks. I think that is a very strong and very important point. But what were the truths that WikiLeaks exposed? It's the truths about Iraq, the truths about Guantanamo Bay, the truths about extraordinary rendition, the truths about the abuse of human rights at the one place in the world where there is no concept whatsoever of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights having any applicability, and that is Guantanamo Bay. And I have taken up the cases of a number of people, British nationals and others, who've been in Guantanamo Bay, and indeed was part of a delegation to the US Senate to plead for the release of a number of people from there. But we should also reflect that the media that made so much of the news story of the WikiLeaks publication, the exposure of Iraq, of Afghanistan, of Guantanamo Bay, and of so many other things around the world. And indeed, the spying on Angela Merkel, the spying on other leading political figures, the spying on people who didn't know they were being spied on. Many of us are accustomed to that particular process. Made a great deal about that and pretended they had these great scoops. Where are they now in defending a journalist who has exposed the truth about what is going on around the world? And so I don't know what the outcome of this particular process is going to be when the judgment is handed down in February of next year. All I do know is that whatever the result then, as Jennifer has already explained, it's not going to be without an appeal by either side. It will then go through another process of appeal, and that will probably end up in the Supreme Court in Britain. And after that, I would imagine it will go to the European Court of Human Rights. And the British government is still, we understand, committed to maintaining membership of the European Court of Human Rights and adherence to the European Convention on Human Rights, which are not EU institutions, they're Council of Europe institutions. And I've recently become a member of the Council of Europe. So I will obviously be watching that very, very closely. But if all those cases are lost and somewhere along the line a decision is made by the relevant Interior Minister in Britain, the Home Secretary, to deport Julian Assange to the USA, then another process will no doubt begin in American courts. So we're looking at somebody who has been badly treated, suffered appallingly in prison and in incarceration effectively in the Ecuadorian embassy, then going through years of legal wrangling whilst in high security prisons in the United States. Is there a way around all this? Yes, there is. There is for the British government to simply say that they do not believe it would be legally just or proper, would be within the terms of the Universal Convention on Human Rights and the European Convention on Human Rights for Julian Assange to be deported to a place where he would, as we well know, suffer the torture of the incarceration system within the United States. It's within their hands to do it. When you showed the video earlier of Tarek speaking at the Russell Tribunal about Vietnam, he explained what happened in Vietnam, what napalm did to people, what the My Lai massacre was really about. That information crept out and it turned public opinion about the war in Vietnam, because that was a pre-internet age, a pre-social media age. We relied on limited first-hand accounts to know what was going on in Vietnam. I was part of the campaign against the Vietnam War. We now know much more around the world. We now have much more information. What we've been told is what the brutality of war is, what happens when you invade Iraq. You can wave a flag, you can lift yourself up to some patriotic fervor about the need to go to war in Iraq. But at the end of it, children die, homes are destroyed, schools are destroyed, hospitals are destroyed, people's lives are destroyed. And then, years later, they show up as refugees trying to get across the Mediterranean or the English Channel to get to a place of safety because of the way their lives were destroyed by wars promoted by Western interests. I'm pleased we're having this tribunal today, and I'm pleased at the way in which people are at last beginning to understand. If we want to live in a safe and secure world, you respect human rights everywhere, for everybody, all over the world. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Jeremy. And by listening to you, I feel even more sad that Britain didn't get the leader it deserves, but it is never too late. And thanks a lot for your commitment. And thanks also for reminding us that this is a long struggle. a very long struggle. Unfortunately, we will have to move on because other speakers are waiting, but I'm inviting all of you to stay if you can. There will be a next round where we'll be able to talk to everyone. And before I present the guest of the next session, who is not able to speak because he's 23 hours in solitary confinement, because he's in a glass box and cannot even speak to his lawyers, we will hear Julian Assange himself. So
but
please.
It's quite incredible to see this extent of support for me, for WikiLeaks, for the people that we fight together for knowledge and understanding of the world. Of course, this event didn't come from nowhere. It came from the blood and sweat of courageous people, people putting in a lot of hard work at the different venues, and I'll mention some of those afterwards. I only have a few minutes to talk, and so I thought I would just say something perhaps that is not to be expected. I'm sure all of you must expect that I speak about the injustice that I have personally gone through and others close to me. While I have been detained without charge as of today for 2,022 days and 4 years in the embassy. But there are some consolations to being arbitrarily detained. And there is some luck in being an accused person. To luck in being accused of being a spy, a terrorist, luck in being accused of being a sex criminal. And you might think that surely it is a shock and a devastation to wake up to find one transformed into a demon, into a thing, into an unspeakable thing, a frightening thing. No, it's wonderful, because it is not that you change, it is that others change. You stay the same, but you now have a gift. You now have a superpower, the superpower of the accused. This superpower is to reveal the true characters of others. Who does not long from childhood for such a power, to understand the true nature of one's friends? We are not traduced, we the accused, but the people and states around us are. Great characters rise and great cultures step forward to shine. False smiles fade, concealed alliances are revealed, the timid retreat, and love is no longer merely a word, but it is an action. This is the superpower of the accused, and it is no more prevalent in the superpower of the accused by superpowers. There are many of us now. Chelsea Manning, serving 35 years in a US military prison, tortured, alleged to be my co-conspirator. Appeal is coming in 2 months. Jeremy Hammond, sentenced to 10 years in the United States for allegedly revealing information to the public. Barrett Brown, US journalist that we worked with. Laurie Love, here in the UK, where the United States is about extraditing. Edward Snowden, who has asylum now in Russia. Gottfried Svartholm-Waag, one of our consultants who was renditioned illegally by Swedish intelligence services from Cambodia to Sweden. Although none of us are special, we gather around us the very special, and we do it because of this superpower of the accused. The people who have constructed this event are special people. They have resisted the filters and fear that normally keep timid people or people with false alliances at bay. So I want you to look around you and understand that, at least for the organizers and the speakers who are performing all for free, that these are interesting people with good character, and you should form alliances with them. And to a degree, the people in the audience, having come, have something about their quality that is special.
And we are back. Unfortunately, Julian Assange doesn't have a public voice anymore. And that's one of the reasons why the Belmarsh Tribunal will give the voice to him again. I think Julian mentioned something very important in his speech, and this is the importance of protecting the sources, the importance of people who are courageous enough to risk. He mentioned Chelsea Manning, he mentioned Edward Snowden, he mentioned many others who suffered immensely already because of revealing the dirty secrets and the war crimes of the United States government and its deep state. Julian also mentioned something very important, which is the fact that he didn't change, although there was a character assassination obviously going on, but others changed. Today, we have people who also didn't change, and I will present some of them, some of his long-standing friends and supporters who didn't change, who stayed the same and who are today with us. One of them is my great friend from Ljubljana. I almost said, I wanted to say Ljubljana, from Slovenia, Slavoj Žižek, a philosopher and someone who visited Julian Assange frequently at the Ecuadorian embassy. The other one is also a good friend of Julian and theater director and artist Angela Richter, who is joining us from Berlin. Hello, Angela. Nice to see you. And the next speaker of this session is John McDonnell, politician from UK and the shadow councillor of the Labour Party. Hello, John. Nice to see you at the Belmarsh Tribunal. I will first give the floor to Slavoj, and then we will continue with other speakers. So please, Slavoj, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. It's a great honor for me to speak here. On November 21st, I visited Julian in Belmarsh prison, and one small detail did strike me as emblematic. Julian's friend who accompanied me brought me a cup of coffee, which was put onto a table where Julian and me were sitting. I took off the plastic cover of the cup, took a sip, and then put the cup back on the table without putting on again the plastic cover. Immediately, within 2-3 seconds, a guard approached me and signaled me with a hand gesture that I should put the cover back on the cup of coffee. I did as told, but I was slightly surprised by this demand and asked for an explanation, which, of course, was a warm human one. It is for your own good and protection, sir. You are sitting at a table with a dangerous prisoner, probably prone to violent acts, and seeing between the two of you an open cup of hot coffee may solicit him to throw it into your face. Why such a panic of those in power? After the fall of the Berlin Wall, there are now new walls rising everywhere. And the trial against Assange is, all in all, just another brick in a new wall. But some of these walls are fragile, built like a castle of cards. If you take the right card out, it all collapses. That's why those in power pursue Julian with such fury. Recall just the dark sarcasm of his character assassination, which reached the lowest imaginable point with the absurd claim that he was painting the walls of his room with his excrements. So again, why such a panicky reaction? While we ordinary consumers see only the visible side of our digital moon, Julian made us see that there is also the dark side of the moon. He made us see that the worst unfreedom is the unfreedom which we experience as freedom. From my youth, I remember a classic East German joke. Richard Nixon, Brezhnev, and Erich Honecker confront God, asking him about the future of their countries. To Nixon, God answers, in 2050, United States will be communist. Nixon turns around and starts to cry. To Brezhnev, God says, in 2050, the Soviet Union will be a Chinese province. After Brezhnev also turns around and starts to cry, Honecker finally asks, and how will it be with my beloved German Democratic Republic? God turns around and starts to cry. We can easily imagine a version of the same joke if heroes like Julian disappear from our world. Putin, the Chinese president Xi Jinping, and Donald Trump confront God with the same question. To Putin, God answers, Russia will be controlled by China. Putin turns around and starts to cry. To Xi, God answers, the mainland China will be dominated by Taiwan. So Xi does the same. When Trump finally asks the same question, God turns around and starts to cry. Why? What we are getting today is the combination of strong authoritarian state with wild capitalist dynamic. The most efficient form of capitalism today is what Henry Farrell called networked authoritarianism. If a state spies on people enough and allows machine learning systems to incorporate their behavior and respond to it, it is possible to provide for everyone's needs better than in a democracy. Here, Xi, Putin, and Trump are joining hands. Julian made us see this. There is another joke that I cannot avoid repeating it, my favorite. From the time of the World War I, a joke about the exchange of telegrams between the German army headquarters and the Austrian-Hungarian headquarters. The message from Berlin to Vienna is the situation on our part of the front is serious but not catastrophic, while the reply from Vienna is, with us the situation is catastrophic but not serious. The reply from Vienna seems to offer a model for how we tend to react to crises today, from COVID pandemic to forest fires. Yeah, we know a catastrophe is pending, media warn us all the time, but somehow we are not ready to take the situation quite seriously. And things are similar with Julian. Everybody that I ask, they say, yeah, it's an ethical, legal catastrophe, but those in power, are basically, to quote the words of a well-known pop song, killing him softly, Julian. But very few seem to take his situation seriously. With the awareness that our own fate is at stake in his case, we, the tribunal here, are not appealing to you, the broad public, because we need your help. No, you need Assange and us to retain whatever remains of your freedom. In Chile, during the protests that erupted in October 2019, one of the graffiti on the walls said, "Another end of the world is possible." This should be our answer to those in power who spread apocalyptic fears. Yes, your world is coming to an end, but the options provided by the forces of establishment are not the only ones. Another end of the world is possible. And Julian embodies this possibility. Thanks.
Thank you a lot, Slavoj, for your inspiring speech and for joining the Belmarsh Tribunal. I will now pass the word to Angela Richter, German theater director, a friend of Julian, and you have been also writing about your visits to the trial in UK for German media, which were quite shocking revelations, I would say, about the trial itself. So, Angela, please, thanks for having you at the Belmarsh Tribunal.
Hi, everyone. I'm also very happy and honored to be part of it. And having heard most of the people who spoke before me, I can only agree to most of it and cannot add so much new because we heard a lot. I wrote about the trial that I followed first in February and then now in September and October. I wrote about it for Der Freitag and also for Die Welt. And I don't want to repeat too much that everyone has said because mostly it was covered, especially by Jennifer Robinson, who is also a dear friend, that is said about the trial. So I will be a little bit in this tribunal witness for Julian, for his personality, because as we also heard before, his personality was very much attacked in the last 10 years. I was a witness to that too, and it was very weird for me to experience this because maybe the people of you who read Orwell's 1984 remember there was something called Doppeldenk. And it means that two things or two claims, theories, can exist and be true at the same time, although they contradict itself. I think it's a very simple example in the book. It's 4 and 4 can be either 8, or it can be 7, or it can be 6. And all of these 3 things can be true at the same time. So what happened to me while I knew Julian was that I was also reading a lot of newspapers because obviously I was curious what they were writing about him. And in that time, in the last 10 years, something happened in my brain, what I would call Doppeldenk, you know. It felt like there were 2 Julians, the one that I knew that was my friend, and the other one that only existed in the press. But I'm just telling you this because to explain how powerful propaganda can be and how can it manifest in a brain. So I was always wondering, when even I have this weird Julian figure in my head that I don't know is not real, but still in a weird way it became real, even for me, you know. It was like in a parallel universe. So it's not to underestimate, and I can only agree to everyone what they said. The press was doing a really bad job in this. They were following the narrative of the American intelligence agencies, and this is something which is now a big problem, because I think we would need a lot of support now from the general public and so on. Like Slavoj said, we need a support that is huge, and like you know, the climate change protests and so on. But okay, we still have hope in a way, and I want to contribute a little bit, at least, to set the narrative straight. I have to say that I experienced so many things with Julian that were positive. One of the smears always in newspapers was that he is a misogynist, you know, and a sexist and stuff like that. That was a very common one. I think it was produced to also, you know, to convince also feminists and people who are traditionally on the left to doubt him and that he's someone that cannot be supported for that reason. So I must say that everything I did in the last years was very, very much empowered, supported by him as a person. So I became an author. I started writing, and the person who was really giving me a lot of courage and always encouraging me, which is not so typical for males, was always him. He always took me very serious. He treated me like a person and like a human being and not like a woman, you know. And I want to emphasize that because I think it's very important to sometimes contradict the official narrative. Having said that, I also want to refer of something that I experienced during the trials. It was, I think, a memory of mine. I think it was 2012. He was in the embassy, and it was one of my first meetings. I think it was my first meeting with him in the embassy. I met him only 2 times before he went to the embassy, and it was my first official interview with him that I wanted to use to create my first play about him called Assassinate Assange. The title was referred to his character assassination, how he called it even then. I mean, that's like many years ago, but he was already totally aware of what's happening. So I think it was, I came in the early evening and we talked, and I was prepared to be there for 2-3 hours, but very typical for Julian. I think Srećko can confirm that you have to stay at least 5 hours, but maybe even 10. So I had my recording device on and I was asking him questions, and I think it was at 4 in the morning that I got really tired, you know. And you have to imagine I was really keen to get as much material as I could and stuff. And at some point I said, you know what, I'm so tired, we have to stop and can continue next time and so on. But he was still full of energy. And before that, I realized that in the room there were some, what you call that, diving bottles, you know, with oxygen in it. And he took one of these bottles. They were quite huge. And he explained to me, I was putting on a mask, and he explained to me how to breathe with them, because he said if I breathe oxygen, I might become more fit to just continue with the interview. And he was right, it really helped. So, but why am I telling you this? I later asked him, okay, what are these bottles for? And he told me, yeah, well, that he's afraid, and that he has also information that it might happen, that he might be dragged out of the embassy by force, kidnapped and stuff, and that in case they would release some gas into the embassy, that he can use the oxygen to be safe from it. So at that point, at 5 in the morning, I was thinking, okay, that's a little bit of a bizarre story. Maybe he is a bit paranoid, you know. But later, when I was joining the trial, and this was discussed just, I think, in the last 2 or 3 days of the exhibition hearings, there were anonymous sources from the firm UC Global that was spying on Julian. And they confirmed that there were plans by the American intelligence leading to the highest order of power in the US to take him out by either kidnapping him from the embassy or even poisoning him. So these things were considered. And from this point of view, it changed my perspective on the event that I found rather funny or bizarre at the time. But years later, I was convinced that he was really right about what he thought could happen to him. And unfortunately, it did happen. So yeah, I will finish at that. I just want to say one more thing: free Assange.
Thanks a lot, Angela. I think we can all subscribe to this. That's why we are launching the Belmarsh Tribunal. And as we are kicking off the Belmarsh Tribunal, I'm really honored for us to be joined by a Labour MP, former Shadow Councillor John McDonnell, who also visited Julian at prison and who is a very outspoken defender of this case. So my question is, John, what do you think? How could we bring justice to the victims of US imperialism, but also to Julian Assange? What would need to happen at this moment so that justice is finally brought back?
It's exactly as Angela has just said now. We need a mass mobilization of support, both not just in the UK, but globally. And I'm glad this tribunal has taken place to add to that mobilization. Because after I visited Julian in Belmarsh prison in March of course, the question is always asked, why are you raising this case at all? Why are you supporting this campaign against extradition? And why are you supporting Julian Assange? And the way in which we can help him best is to convince people why it is the right thing to support Julian and why it is important that we mobilize on a mass basis to prevent this injustice taking place. And I've tried to answer as briefly as I can in the various interviews I've done since then, exactly why I am raising his case, why I am supporting this campaign. And there's a number of very basic principles, and both the previous speakers have raised them. First of all, I do believe in democracy as possibly the optimum form of government and the way in which we can manage our affairs politically. But there are certain ground rules, values of democracy, of a democratic system. And one of them is something I've campaigned with our own National Union of Journalists and other organizations that represent journalists across the world. One of them is the freedom of the press. And therefore, standing up for a journalist who has exercised a considerable role in securing the display of a freedom of a press that Julian has is critical for us. And it's worth reminding people that oppressive regimes come to power, and one of the first group of people that they seek to round up, and we've seen across the world, imprison, abuse, and in some instances murder, are journalists, because they do not want journalists to tell the truth. And so this is, I think, the case against Julian is not just a case against him as an individual, it's an attempt by regimes to send a message to all journalists, and that message is silence. Be silent, otherwise we'll come for you. That's why this case is so critical to democracy. The second point I've always tried to get across to people is people have supported the whole idea of whistleblowing. In fact, in this country, we've legislated, and in other countries too, legislated to seek to protect whistleblowers. Well, we've legislated to protect them in whistleblowing in private companies, in the civil service, and in some elements of political life as well. But what else is Julian apart from a whistleblower? Whistleblowing in the way in which he's exposed some of the most outrageous crimes, war crimes, in recent history. So, of course, if you've supported the concept of whistleblower, you have to support Julian Assange. And also, I've tried to say in all the interviews I've done is I believe in justice. I just believe in the right to a person to a fair trial. And we know, as we've seen from the Chelsea Manning experience and many others, that if Julian gets extradited, there is no hope of a fair trial. And again, the message going out from those court decisions is be silent. You will be silenced. And we'll use the mechanisms of the judicial system to silence you. The other issue for me as well, I've tried to get across the moral argument. When the Iraq War and other wars have taken place, illegal, unjust wars, military interventions, often what's cited is the principles of just war. And you have to remind people what those principles are. As a war is the last resort, but fundamental is the protection of civilians. What Julian and his colleagues at WikiLeaks have exposed is that those that have argued for these wars and military interventions using the just war theory have completely offended against that theory, because it has been, as we've seen in some of the pictures that we saw today, it's been innocent civilians and others that have been murdered in these wars. And I genuinely believe this is an issue of morality. And if you don't stand up for Julian Assange in this way, actually you're colluding in that immorality of the wars that took place and the military interventions that took place. finally, I want to make this point as well. Deep inside of me, as I suppose my trade union tradition, but also my socialist tradition, and also a tradition within our society of humanity, I don't want to stand by and see victimization take place. And that's what's happening with Julian. I visited him in Belmarsh. I know Belmarsh. I've visited others in their constituents included. It's a high security regime. It's oppressive. When I visited Julian back in March, only a month before, there'd been a suicide on his wing. That's how oppressive this regime is. And I believe he's in there because this is part of the victimization process. And it's a part of the process of trying to destroy an individual, his spirit, and again, send out a message to others that we can break you. So I stand in solidarity on the basis of that appalling attacks on an individual, and therefore I stand in solidarity against the victimization. Let me just say this finally. I just think morally, socially, politically, we all have a responsibility. The responsibility is on our shoulders to stand up in solidarity with Julian. I think we've got to oppose this extradition. We've got to ensure that we succeed in this campaign, because if not, nobody's safe. And I only just hope if it ever happened to any one of us, there'd be others who came forward and campaigned in this way. And that's why I think this tribunal is so important and can be significant in adding weight to this campaign. I just want to say one final point as well on a personal basis. I send a message of solidarity to Stella Moros as well for the suffering that she's endured as Julian's partner, and for the courage that she's displayed too. I think we'll win this campaign, but it does require a mobilization on a scale maybe we haven't seen for quite a long while on miscarriages of justice in this way.
Thanks a lot, John. This is really the big challenge that is in front of all of us, but also in front of everyone here behind the screens, especially in times of a global pandemic, I think. To make this a global campaign, which is not just about saving a man's life, but about saving our own lives and democracy itself. Before we have a very short discussion among ourselves, I would suggest that now, since we mentioned assassinate Assange as a term, as a concept, the assassination of his character, but also literal assassination that almost took place and which is taking place now at Belmarsh prison, I suggest we watch a video and then we all return.
High-tech terrorists.
Cyber terrorists.
High-tech terrorists.
Cyber terrorists.
Information terrorism.
Shut it down. We're going to hang you.
Use a drone or something.
A bullet in the brain.
Illegally shoot the son of a...
Information warfare is warfare. And Julian Assange is engaged in warfare. Information terrorism, which leads to people getting killed, is terrorism. And Julian Assange is engaged in terrorism. He should be treated as an enemy combatant. WikiLeaks should be closed down permanently and decisively.
Should the United States do something to stop Mr. Assange?
We're looking at that right now. The Justice Department is taking a look at that. I would argue that it's closer to being a high-tech terrorist than the Pentagon Papers.
This disclosure is not just an attack on America's foreign policy interests. It is an attack on the international community.
The head of WikiLeaks is not a particularly credible source in my mind. He is a, in my mind, he's a criminal, and he ought to be hunted down and grabbed and put on trial for what he has done here.
I think the man is a high-tech terrorist. He's done enormous.
Assange.
Yeah. He needs to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and if that becomes a problem, we need to change the law.
Well, I think Assange should be assassinated, actually. I think Obama should put out a contract and maybe use a drone or something.
You don't want to act panicked and have the
Well, you don't have to act
United
panic.
States.
You can act tough and say, if we catch you, we're going to hang you.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
We heard some of that from Holder.
Julian Assange is a cyber terrorist in wartime. He's guilty of sabotage, espionage, crimes against humanity. He should be killed.
How is it that the WikiLeaks guy remains free? You know, back in the old days when men were men and countries were countries, this guy would die of lead poisoning from a bullet in the brain, and nobody would know who put it there.
The way to deal with this is pretty simple. We got special ops forces. I mean, a dead man can't leak stuff. This guy's a traitor, a treasonous, and he has broken every law of the United States. The guy ought to be, and I'm not for the death penalty, so if I'm not for the death penalty, I only want to do it, illegally shoot the son of a...
It's time that the Obama administration treats WikiLeaks for what it is, a terrorist organization whose continued operations threatens our security. Shut it down. Shut it down. It is time to shut down this terrorist organization, this terrorist website, WikiLeaks. Shut it down, Attorney General Holder.
And we are back. So before we close this round, because I know that we have some other speakers waiting for the next session, I would love for a final comment of each of you, very short one, and if you can give a comment on what we have just seen in the video. I will start in the same order with Slavoj, Angela, and then John. Slavoj.
Very briefly, in these last clips that we saw, did you notice how the politicians who even advocate killing, liquidating Assange are coming from both sides of the American political spectrum, Republicans, Democrats, and so on? Isn't this a sad moment when we, so-called, often dismissed as radical leftists, have to fight not for some our totalitarian secret cause, but for the basics of liberal democracy itself? That's what makes me sad about our.
And then you have the liberals themselves who are attacking us instead of saving the liberal democracy. To add, Angela, please. A very short remark, closing remark. But this is just the first tribunal. We will all meet again.
No, for me, it's just my remark is just saying. If we just, when we watch this, we have to just replace the word information with truth, because that's what he did, expose the truth about war criminals, and they call him a truth terrorist. And this is saying all, I think, because can the truth be terrorism? It is so absurd, you know, it's just so obvious, and the brutality. And that these people even can go on camera and say out loud that someone who exposed the truth should be killed for it. There is nothing to add to it. It's just obvious.
Thanks, Angela.
It's clear in my mind watching that, and to everybody who sees that, in that political climate, there is no hope of any form of just trial in the US. But more importantly, I fear there's no guarantee of Julian's physical safety in that political climate. That's why it's critical that we win this campaign against extradition.
Thanks a lot, everyone. As said, this is just the first tribunal. We will continue. I thank you from the bottom of my heart and everyone from the Progressive International who has been working hard to make this happen. I thank you, and I will welcome you very soon again. So before we continue, we will show a special song by MIA called Control, which she dedicated to Julian Assange.
Now, world town reach, dark skin on beach. I don't use the bleach, driving in the seat, and my BM goes screech. Rendezvous in Greece, they wanna get a piece. Modern day Toski, I give them war and peace. Un, deux, trois, quatre, cinq, six. Why you gotta fuck with me? Just to be a beach. Yeah, first female singer on the blacklist. The truth, I wonder why the points missed. World town intelligence, I'm here for justice. If you try to break me, you better practice. Sheila and Bhagwan, 50-50 mix. Mystic gangster, I don't take the lips. Gucci gang, Gucci gang, what again, poor again, car gang. Future gang, lang, make it bang. Get it dang, get it dang, get it dang. Hands up, hands down, wake up, snap out. We don't stand up when they try to control, 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 control. Hands up, hands down, wake up, snap out. We don't stand up when they try to control, 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 control. Face mask, ski mask, now you think you're hard. One woman bandit, a moon shaped scar. Personality wide, I gave it 3 names. No, it's not split, I control my own brain. Use 8% and split it 2 ways. I use more than that, make them open up a gaze. Can me down, madame, she's so complicated. Problematic, traumatized, so the fuck is she okay? Standing in the way of the trolls. Everything they say about me's false. They be typing the most. Hiding in the net like a ghost. Hands up, hands down, wake up, snap out. We don't stand up when they try to control, 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 control. Hands up, hands down, wake up, snap out. We don't stand up when they try to control, 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 control. Hands up, hands down, wake up, snap out. We don't stand up when they try to control, 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 control.
And welcome back, everyone. MIA was supposed and is still supposed to join us. I know she's in a place where it's very early in the morning, and her name itself means missing in action, so perhaps she won't appear. But I'm very happy that someone also woke up very early in her part of the world. It's around 6 or 8 in the morning, I think. And it's also a long-standing supporter of Julian Assange. I'm really happy to welcome Pamela Anderson. And good morning, Pamela. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning. I was hoping to share with you the beautiful sunrise behind me, even though it's kind of it's a little bit later than that now. I think it's 8 o'clock. But see, the sun rises every morning. We just have to do a better job every day, even though it's rising above a ugly freighter polluting our oceans, and it's a little bit red because of the fires on the West Coast. There's just so much to do. So much to do. And yes, I'm here. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you, SearchCo, for putting this together. It was very educational for me, too, to look at it all, even though I know a lot of the people that have spoken. To see it all in a few hours was really informative and I think really important for people. I think hopefully a lot of people tuned in. It's it's hard for me. It's very emotional for me to think about, our friend Julian and what he's been going through, and how he's so resilient, and how he says, the good things about humans is that they can adapt, and the bad things about humans is that we can adapt. And his children are adapting to being without a father. His, Stella is adapting to being without the man that she loves. It's hard to. It was really hard for me over this time to look at the character assassination, especially to know that this man is a very soft-spoken man, very funny. Kind of funny. He thinks he's funny. Nerdy, kind of just this incredible character who has such integrity and such brilliance, and to get to know his mother even, and to know how he was like as a child, and how he's still the same way as a man, and to have 2 boys and to realize that's the truth. You get what you get. And he is just an incredible person. It's an incredible waste of a brain, of a life that's it's a very dangerous time in human history, and we need people like Julian to be with us and informing us. So WikiLeaks, I met Julian through Vivienne Westwood, who is a dear friend of mine, and I know I feel kind of like Sesame Street, like which one doesn't belong. It's probably me on this channel anyway. But and Julian would always make me feel like that wasn't the case, which was really a wonderful thing for him to be. He made me feel as important as everybody else, and it doesn't matter what you do for a living or what you've done. I feel like I can reach people in funny places. So maybe I am of use, to this kind of crowd, but I'm not as educated or as smart as probably everybody here. I may have a little bit street smarts. I don't know. But it's just, I just can't believe when I listen to Jennifer and I listen to what's gone on in the courts that this isn't going to come about till January 4th. What is he going to do until then? It's going to be, fought in court over the next few years, and, he's going to be stuck in that place. So I'm Hail Mary, maybe, Trump and all of his inconsistencies and erratic kind of behavior, maybe he'll pardon Julian in his final days. That's another issue too. But maybe I should start asking about that. But I just think that maybe I'm here to kind of shed a different light on Julian, because I really got to know him well as a friend, and we had so many great conversations, from jealousy, drawing maps about jealousy and rivals and all kinds of things like that, to the Bible and the writing of the Bible and how he said he was just going down this rabbit hole of interesting ideas about different things. He was the most incredible person I got to talk to, and I really hope that he's hanging in there, because he won't be taken alive. Guaranteed he will not be taken alive. This cannot happen. He cannot be extradited to the United States. And I just, I've been listening to everybody, and I'm just so happy that you did this, and we got to keep doing it. And it's amazing how public opinion, like Angela said, has been so swayed, and we feel like we're kind of in this twilight zone, Orwell kind of existence, where all these lies have become the truth. And that's, how much better can you discredit somebody by calling them, what they have when it came to the sex crimes, which was totally bogus. We know that. So I guess that's my part of this is I consider myself, a romantic kind of activist. I still try and see the beauty in each day. I have my cup of courage every morning, and we just try and do the best we can. So thank you for having me here. And, I feel like it's really important to follow, the Don't Extradite Assange Twitter campaign, where we can stay educated and we can all do our best with informing people. I've been on the, other end of this, where I've had people threaten to fire me, threaten to not work with me because of my association with Julian. And I just can't stay silent. So this is, like I said, it's a dangerous moment in human history. And we're all here because we don't agree with war or war crimes, and the truth should not be punished. It should be the people that committing the crimes. And let's just pray for Julian, pray for his safety. He will not be safe. He will not let himself be taken alive. That was made very clear to me too. So that's really important for all of us to know that this cannot happen. And that's, this is my problem. I read a bunch of notes and then I can't read them. I have the worst handwriting. What is this? It's a disaster. It's a mess. Anyway, so
yeah, thanks, Pamela.
My support.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Pamela, also for waking up so early, for showing us a sunrise, which I think is a good reminder for everyone that we live on the same planet. It's getting dark in this part of the Adriatic Sea. It's getting day in Canada. Unfortunately, Julian didn't see the sun for at least 10 years, and he really needs it desperately. Thank you also, Pamela, in the same way as Angela did it, for shedding light on his character, because I also have the feeling that, this character assassination was quite successful in the sense that leftist groups, feminist groups, and so on didn't support him because they started to believe the propaganda machine which was taking place. And I think your voice, especially your voice, was so important during these years and also today. I would suggest that you stay here for a moment and we look at the message that the former Brazilian President Lula gave, especially for the occasion of this tribunal.
Eu queria te dizer a você, a todos os líderes do mundo, ao Trump, ao primeiro-ministro inglês, ao primeiro-ministro francês e ao mundo inteiro o seguinte: o Assange deveria, nesse momento, estar sendo definido como um herói da democracia, como um herói da liberdade, como um herói da comunicação, como um cara que prestou bem à humanidade, sabe, denunciando os crimes de guerra cometidos pelos Estados Unidos da América do Norte. Eu até disse ontem que ele deveria estar sendo votado para ganhar o Prêmio Nobel da Paz. Porque se os democratas do planeta Terra, envolvendo todos os jornalistas, todos os advogados, todo sindicalista, todo político, não tiverem coragem de se manifestar em defesa do Assange, para que ele não seja extraditado, significa que tem muitos democratas mentirosos. Significa que a liberdade de imprensa, tão cantada em versos prosa pelos donos dos grandes jornais, é mentira. Porque o Assange não merece ser punido. O Assange merece ser reconhecido como um homem que prestou enorme serviço à humanidade, denunciando o genocídio das guerras, denunciando a mentira, a manipulação, às vezes, dos Estados Unidos como maior potência militar do mundo. O Assange não pode ser extraditado se as pessoas acreditarem em democracia. Sabe, porque os jornais que deram a notícia não foram processados. Não foi preso nenhum dono de jornal. Como é que pode um jornalista ser preso e condenado por prestar informação que todos os jornais defendem? Cadê a Associação dos Jornalistas Norte-Americanos? Cadê a Associação dos Jornalistas Ingleses? Cadê a Associação dos Jornalistas Franceses? Cadê as ordens dos advogados? Cadê o Conselho de Direitos Humanos da ONU? É preciso todo mundo sair do armário e defender o Assange. Se a gente quiser continuar acreditando e defendendo liberdade de imprensa, liberdade de informação, liberdade de comunicação. É isso. Portanto, o Assange precisa ser defendido por todos nós que amamos a democracia, que amamos a liberdade de imprensa, que amamos a liberdade sindical, que amamos a liberdade de organização. Liberdade não tem adjetivos. Ou é liberdade ou não é liberdade. E o Assange prestou serviços à humanidade. Ele não prestou desserviço. Aquela informação de um helicóptero americano matando pessoas civis no Iraque, inclusive 2 jornalistas da Reuters, sabe? Aquilo, o Assange deveria estar sendo premiado por ter feito aquilo. Então eu espero que o povo inglês, que o povo francês, que o povo americano não permita mais essa atrocidade. Não será o joelho de um policial matando um negro. Será o joelho de milhões de governantes do mundo sufocando o Assange para que ele morra em vida. E nós não temos o direito de permitir isso.
So we are back, and after this powerful speech by Lula, we are also coming to an end of this tribunal. I'm really happy to have Pamela still here. Since we started, I don't know whether you succeeded to watch, it was really early in Canada, but we started by a speech by Roger Waters, who stressed how important empathy is. Mm-hmm. And if I know any person who is who has so much empathy, then it's you, with everything you have been doing during your activist years, and the empathy you showed for Julian. So I would love to hear from you a final message, a message about the importance of empathy, solidarity, and love, and how we can all together succeed in not only freeing Julian Assange, but freeing ourselves.
Well, I my goal in my life was always to live a romantic life. And I think to live romantically is to be engaged in the world and to care about other things outside of yourself. And I guess that is empathy. And that's the only hope we really have, I think, is love. And, not to probably a different turn here. I think we need to, wish President Trump and the First Lady a speedy recovery. They've contracted the coronavirus. And, we don't have to sink as low as everybody else. And we can still wish our fellow humans the best possible outcome. And let's hope and pray that in Trump's final days, maybe he will do something miraculous and pardon Julian.
Thanks a lot, Pamela. You never know. Even if it doesn't happen, we will be here at the Belmarsh Tribunal. We hope you will join us again. And at the very end of this tribunal, I would love to thank you for watching us, for participating. As long as there are people like you outside there, we should, I think there is hope for democracy and for freedom on this planet, which is on the verge of extinction and mass extinction. Please consider donating to the Progressive International, which relies only on personal donations. And if you donate, you can be sure that one of the proceedings will also go to the Belmarsh Tribunal. This is just the first tribunal. We will continue. And at the very end, I want to thank Roger Waters, Lula, Yanis Varoufakis, Jennifer Robinson, Angela Richter, Slavoj Žižek, John McDonnell, Tariq Ali, Pamela Anderson. I probably forgot someone, and I want to thank you who watched us, and I hope you will continue in this struggle, and we will all be together in this. At the end, we will show a song by the Slovenian band Laibach, a song which Julian really loved, and he was playing it plenty of times at the Ecuadorian embassy. It is a song which is a call to arms.